Welcome to this Tutor to You Sociology topic video on families and households, looking at Marxism and the family. Marxists have adopted a critical view of the family, often believing the family to be an agent of social control that reinforces the ideas of the ruling class and serves the needs of capitalism. They argue that the family keeps the working class in a state of false class consciousness, believing that if they can look after their family, they are succeeding in life. The main Marxist theorists that have taken a critical view of the family are Friedrich Engels, who looked at the evolution of the family as a monogamous relationship to serve the needs of capitalism; Louis Althusser, who suggested that the family acts as a form of ideological state apparatus, controlling the way that the working class think in order to stop them from rebellion; and Haas Child, a more contemporary Marxist who looks at the commodification of the family and how alienation has spread from work to home. There is also Eli Zaretsky, whose writings in the 1970s were a thorough examination of how family serves the needs of capitalism, but we will explore those in a separate video. Engels suggested that the advent of capitalism, and specifically the ownership of property, had changed the way in which the family unit operated. Engels suggested that prior to capitalism, there existed a promiscuous horde, with polygamous relationships between members of a society. With ownership of private property, land and wealth needed to be transferred from a father to his rightful heirs, and with practices of polygamy, this was not possible. Society shifted, therefore, to monogamous relationships, where fathers could be certain that those that inherited their property were their biological children. This patrilineal inheritance meant that women's sexuality was controlled, and they became glorified prostitutes, according to Engels, exchanging food and shelter for the production of legitimate heirs to a man's property. As a man could only be certain that his heir was biologically his if his wife's sexual behaviour was controlled, this led to monogamous relationships to protect themselves from claims on their property. Feminists have criticised Engels' views. They suggest that Engels saw women and children as being solely influenced by economic necessity, whereas they would argue that this was a form of patriarchal control over women's sexuality. Furthermore, there is little evidence of Engels' assertions that the promiscuous horde existed in the era before the ownership of property and inheritance. A final evaluation is that monogamous relationships do not stop people from committing adultery, and that even in contemporary society, paternity is far from certain, even within a marriage. A second Marxist criticism of family life is put forward by Althusser. As with education, Althusser saw the control of the family as being an ideological state apparatus that was utilised by the ruling classes to ensure obedience and conformity of the working classes. Ideas on how to raise children and the norms and values expected of family life were passed down from the ruling classes, as were the organisation of roles within the family and the expectations of males and females in providing for their children. As such, parents would socialise their children into socially acceptable behaviours that were determined by those with power in society. These behaviours were then policed by other social institutions such as religion, education and the welfare state. Families were under constant scrutiny to ensure that they were bringing their children up properly, and faced sanctions ranging from public disapproval to having their children removed from them should they not conform. However, Althusser's ideas were not based on empirical evidence and were theoretical at best. A further consideration is the extent to which parents are influenced in the raising of their children by the behaviour of the elites. Some sociologists have argued that within lower social classes, subcultural values are stronger than the examples set by the elites, and this can be seen in the different types of family structures that have become common in British society. A final evaluation of Althusser is that his view is deterministic, and ignores the meanings that people assign to their own actions. Particularly in contemporary society, many parents make value judgments on the raising of their children based upon their values, rather than those of wider society. A final Marxist interpretation of family life is offered by Haas Child. Family life has become commodified in the 21st century, according to Haas Child, with relationships now being translated as a series of transactions that have values to individuals. Relationships are more like connections in the 21st century, with connections severed if it is less likely to impact positively on somebody's self-worth. This is due to the extension of alienation from work into home life, and how dissatisfaction with living in a capitalist society can no longer be soothed by the family unit. This leads to emotional struggles between family members, which impacts on their self-esteem and self-worth, making the transactions between individuals less desirable. But Haas Child is accused of overstating the importance of work in the 21st century, particularly as people are increasingly placing more emphasis on family life than work. Emotional security for some is worth more than the feelings of alienation from employment, and people often change careers several times in their lives. Ulrich Beck suggested that as a consequence of the precarity of employment, males are now more likely to define themselves by their actions as a father, a permanent status, rather than by their occupations, an all too often temporary one. That concludes this Tutor to You Sociology topic video on families and households, looking at Marxism and the family. Thanks for watching.